Another sad week in which we lost one of our heroes. General Joe Henry Engle passed away last week at age 91.
And to help us celebrate his life, we're today joined by Michelle Evans, who has previously released an incredible book about the X-15, the hypersonic space plane for which Joe Engle was one of the pilots.
Do you have any Joe Engle stories? We'd love to know. Please get in touch via our social media pages at Space and Things Podcast on Threads, Instagram, and Facebook, via the contact form on our website, or by leaving a review on your podcast platform.
And please consider joining us on patreon.com/Space and Things. But right now, it's time for episode 203 of the Space and Things podcast.
Oh my God! Unbelievable, but it is right this time. You're listening to Space and Things with Dave Giles and Emily Carney.
I'm Emily Carney.
And I'm Dave Giles, and welcome to episode 203 of our podcast. Now, before we begin, I want to let you know about some jeopardy that's going on as we're recording this. Emily is in the middle of the craziest storm ever. We've already had a dropout. We've just done the interview. She's already been blown out of the internet a few times by this storm. So you may hear it in the background every now and then, but I keep looking at Emily's face and being quite concerned for her. You look very scared, Emily.
Yeah, I'm a Floridian, and I'm used to weather like this, like lightning storms and thunderstorms and stuff, and this is exceptionally bad. We've had, seriously, probably close to at least 40, if not more, strikes like right on top of us. So if you hear any explosions in the background, that's what that is. So I apologize. I'd also like to apologize for Michelle Evans. I love you, Michelle. You're one of my favorite authors, and I really wanted to talk to you, but I swear every 2 seconds I was getting literally blown out of the interview. I mean, it's just been wild. So, yep, you can still hear it now. This has been going on for about an hour.
Wow. Yeah, who'd live in Florida?
I know. Right now, I'm like, I was telling Steve, I'm going to go to a place with a generator because this is wild. Yeah, like with a generator, this is wild. For me, even for somebody who's a native Floridian, this is crazy. Yeah. So I'd like to apologize to Michelle, Dave, and the listeners right now, but I have no control over this.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll get through it. I just hope you're all right because I've seen your face. This looks scary. Anyway.
It is scary. We had one. I'm not joking. I'll wrap this up. But we had one. I'm sitting next to a window, and I swear we had one hit right on the street next to the window. I mean, that's how bad it is. I'd like to believe I'm pretty tough, and I was like, nope. When that happened, I was like, I'm out of here. A little bit scared, but I'm calming down now. Woo.
Yeah, Thunder and Things, a new podcast brought to you by Emily Carney.
Weather and Things.
Weather and Things, yeah. Floridian weather and things. There
it's
you
just
go.
Me getting knocked off the internet, the whole podcast, and it's me breathing into the microphone,
yeah.
And then it just knocks you. Yeah,
it'd be like some kind of Blair Witch Project vibe going on. Anyway,
that's the whole show.
Yeah.
Yep,
anyway, let's get going with this week. It's unfortunately another sad episode. We've had so many of these recently, and we of course know that there's going to be more over the next few years. That's just the nature of life. We lost General Joe Henry Engle, one of the greatest pilots and astronauts of all time. He died at the age of 91 just earlier this week.
Born on August 26, 1932 in Dickinson County, Kansas, Engle became interested in aviation from a young age. According to a 2004 NASA Johnson oral history interview by Rebecca Wright, Engle said,
I remember reading about aeroplanes in magazines. Didn't go to the movies very much in Chapman, Kansas. They had a movie theater, but we didn't go in there very often. But I do remember two movies. One was of bush pilots in Alaska, and the other one was on the Flying Tigers. And those were two things that I would imagine being and doing as I would play in the backyard. We had a big area on the edge of town, and I would dig a pit in the sand, and that was my cockpit. And I would get a stick or a tree branch or something for the control stick and take old tin cans and push them in the front for instruments and just really be a hero.
Engle's enthusiasm for aviation transformed a childhood dream into a lifelong pursuit. He turned his passion into a profession, earning a degree in aeronautical engineering. from the University of Kansas and entered the U.S. Air Force through the ROTC program. His talent and dedication led him to graduate from the challenging U.S. Air Force Test Pilot and USAF Aerospace Research Pilot schools. While at the latter school, he met and befriended General Chuck Yeager, the school's commandant, with whom he enjoyed a long friendship. In 1963, Engle was selected as one of 2 USAF pilots to fly the X-15 rocket plane, a job that was by then one of the most coveted and exhilarating for a pilot. Engle was only 31. Engle's achievements in the X-15 rocket plane were nothing short of remarkable. He completed 16 flights in the experimental aircraft, exceeding Mach 5 on 10 of those flights and attaining a top speed of Mach 5.71, or 3,886 miles an hour. On his June 29, 1965 flight, he exceeded an altitude in excess of 280,000 feet and became the youngest astronaut at age 32. His wings were earned beside Gemini 4 astronauts James McDivitt and Edward H. White II, who would soon become his colleagues at Houston, Texas's Johnson Space Center.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know about the X-15, it's such an amazing program. And we will definitely be doing a whole episode on the X-15 at some point. We've been talking about this a while, but we're going to make it happen very soon.
Yeah.
In April 1966, Engle became one of the 19 pilots selected to NASA's Astronaut Group 5, also called the Original 19. He served as the backup lunar module pilot for the Apollo 14 lunar mission alongside backup commander Gene Cernan and backup command module pilot Ron Evans. During the mid-1970s, Engle began preparing for the next great space program, the Space Transportation System, or what is better known today as the Space Shuttle, which would see him again fly hypersonic wings into space.
In 1977, Engle commanded Shuttle Enterprise during 2 of its 5 atmospheric-free flights, alongside pilot Richard Truly, unfortunately another legend that we lost earlier this year. And he was also named one of Shuttle Columbia's first commanders, also alongside Truly, shortly thereafter. In November 1981, Engle would make his first orbital spaceflight during STS-2, Columbia's second spaceflight. Despite the early failure of a fuel cell that curtailed the mission, Engle again proved that his piloting skills were second to none. He flew the shuttle program's only partially manual re-entry, putting Columbia through a series of maneuvers to demonstrate its capabilities. His X-15 experience made him the perfect shuttle commander to undertake this historic task. In a NASA oral history connected with Wright, he discussed the importance of this task.
So it was something that, like in anything, there were good, healthy discussions on. And ultimately, the data showed that, yes, it really was worthwhile to get. And therefore, those maneuvers that we did on STS-2 were programmed into the automatic flight control system, into the entry flight control systems, so that subsequent to that, those maneuvers continued to be made and data continued to be gotten. But it was done automatically by the computer.
After a brief stint as NASA's Deputy Associate Administrator for Manned Spaceflight, he returned to Houston in 1983. In 1985, in August 1985, Engle commanded his second shuttle spaceflight, STS-51I Discovery. In November 1986, Engle retired from both NASA and the U.S. Air Force.
The list of achievements and awards earned by Engle is nearly endless, but his NASA biography tidily condenses them into one paragraph. General Engle has flown over 185 different types of aircraft, including 38 different fighter and attack aircraft. He has logged more than 14,700 flight hours, 9,900 in jets, and over 224 hours in space. His military decorations include the Department of Defense Distinguished Service Medal, the Air Force Distinguished Service Medal, and the Air Force Distinguished Flying Cross with Oak Leaf Cluster. He has also been awarded the NASA Distinguished Service Medal, NASA Exceptional Service Medal, and NASA Spaceflight Medal with Device. Other awards include the Harmon International Aviation Trophy, the Collier Trophy, the Goddard Space Trophy, the General Thomas D. White Space Trophy, and the Kincheloe Experimental Test Pilots Trophy.
In his later years, he participated in National Aviation Hall of Fame events and Space Fest, giving innumerable wide-eyed space enthusiasts insight into what it was like to fly not only one, but 2 space planes. After his NASA retirement, he continued to fly aircraft well into his 80s. Engle also donated a large amount of his memorabilia and collection to the EAA Aviation Museum located in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And this includes preliminary designs for Enterprise's approach and landing test patch, and his knee boards from STS-2's reentry, which have his maneuvers penciled in. That is really awesome.
Amazing, yeah.
His generosity in sharing his experiences and knowledge was a gift to the aviation and space community, for which we are deeply grateful. The aviation and space community mourns the loss of a lifelong hero. For many of us, including me, he got us started in spaceflight, really. We send our deepest condolences to General Engle's wife, Jeannie, his family, former colleagues, and many of his friends. His legacy will continue to inspire and guide us in our pursuit of the stars.
And so today we're going to speak to Michelle Evans, who wrote what I think is a definitive book about the X-15 called The X-15 Rocket Plane, Flying the First Wings into Space. As part of her research, and for that book, she interviewed Joe, and he actually wrote the foreword for the book. So she was the first name I had on my list to ask to join us today. Unfortunately, she said yes. So let's celebrate the life of Joe Engle.
And hang on. Here comes the Space and Things podcast with Dave Giles and Emily Carney.
Hello, Michelle. Thank you so much for joining us. First, we'd like to offer our condolences to you on the loss of General Joe Engle. So how did you become familiar with the X-15 program?
Well, Emily, thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you for your thoughts about Joe. How did I get started on the X-15 program? Well, that goes back to my dad. He started taking me along on trips up to Edwards when I was like 5 years old. And I just got fascinated with the place. It was the time when we were going to the moon with, Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. But that was all on TV. The stuff that was happening in Edwards, I got to see in person, and that was pretty amazing. And the people who were the heroes for me at that time were guys like Joe Walker and Joe Engle and Scott Crossfield, those kind of guys.
Yeah.
And I always had this idea in the back of my mind that I wanted to write a book. And it took me many decades to figure out that, let's put my love of the X-15 together with the idea of writing a book. And that's where it started from.
Amazing. So Engle's rise as a young Air Force pilot was stratospheric. Please pardon the pun there. What traits do you think contributed to him becoming a U.S. Air Force pilot to flying one of the most exciting space planes within really a very short amount of time?
Well, he was really good at what he did, that's for sure. He was considered by everyone around him to be one of the best pilots, a very natural pilot. It just came to him so easily, so well, and he was really good at what he did. And so he brought attention to himself just by doing his job really well. And the Air Force picked him out and said, hey, we need somebody new on the X-15. So here's a guy that's definitely going to do the job. And they were certainly right about that.
There's been that famous story about Joe Engle, about him doing a barrel roll in the X-15, which really was not something he was supposed to do. Can you tell us that story? And did he get in trouble for doing that?
Oh, yeah, he definitely got in a bit of trouble for doing that. And in fact, my chapter in the book on Joe Engle is called On a Roll in relation to that specific incident. He was just so elated to get up there and get flying on the X-15. And it was a natural instinct for him as a fighter pilot when he was coming back down to do this roll in exuberance for a fantastic flight. And the problem was that he didn't quite realize that, there were no other chase planes around at the time. He was out of range of that, but there were instruments on board the X-15 that recorded this. And actually the instruments couldn't fully record a roll, but what they did was they went off scale when he did the roll. And so it was the people who were doing the data reduction afterward that saw this anomaly. and decided to bring it to Paul Bickle's attention, who was the head of the X-15 program, and say, we're not quite sure what happened here, but I think maybe he did a roll. And we've told these people not to do rolls of the X-15, although Scott Crossfield had done that previously as well, early in the program. So Paul decided to call Joe in for a little dressing down, but of course, first I had to ask him, so we have these instrument readings, and it infers that you might have done a roll. Did you do that? And it's like, well, yeah. And it's like, well, we don't do that in the X-15. Well, I was just trying to lower my altitude quickly. He came up with that excuse about how, maybe I just I had the word he used was dishing out, where you do the roll and that brings your altitude down very quickly. And from every indication that I got from Joe, it was over the exuberance. It was not out of the fact that he was too high on his approach. So that he was just basically told by Paul, yes, we frown on these things. Please do not do that again. And Joe was properly chastised and walked out of the office. And that was the last he heard of it.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think there's film of it actually on YouTube, and you can tell he does a role in it. It's actually it's hysterical. What was Engle like as an interview subject and really as a person? We always remember every photo I've ever seen of Joe Engle, he's always got a smile.
I think that definitely is an accurate assessment. Just to tell you what was going on with myself at the time and how I got to talk to him. Finding the pilots who were remaining. We had 9 pilots still alive at the time I was doing my research when I started in the 1980s. So it was nice to be able to connect with all these people. And Joe was one that I had not connected with yet. And so I was able to reach out to him through NASA because he was still on board at NASA at the time. And they got the message to him. And at the time, I was actually covering the Voyager program at the Jet Propulsion Lab. And I happened to look one day on the message board. They have a little cork board sitting there. And there was a message for me on the cork board, which I thought was pretty unusual. And then I saw, gee, this is from Joe Engle. And so he had contacted me through JPL, which was very interesting. And I called him back, and we made an arrangement for our talk. And we actually got together on January 26th of 1986 the first time. And he happened to be in town for an event at the Queen Mary in Long Beach. And so I went over to the Queen Mary and met him there. We sat in this fairly dark little room with a little porthole as our only light source, and sat there on the chairs, and I did my interview with him. And it was an exciting time. The flights he'd done on the Space Shuttle and everything. Yeah. It was very unfortunate that 2 days after our first interview is when the Challenger accident happened.
Oh,
and
wow.
Everything changed in that respect. It changed the tone of things afterwards. But for Joe himself, he still always maintained that very positive attitude. The one thing I always like to say about Joe is that he was an absolute gracious person, and he was a true gentleman about everything he ever did. And I saw that from the very first moment that we spoke. When it came time later to find someone to write the foreword for my book, Joe was right there on the top of my list. And I can't say enough about the fact that he readily agreed to do so. It was very interesting because Joe, he was extremely good friends with Chuck Yeager. Chuck and him they were like brothers. They did hunting and fishing together and all these outdoor activities. When Joe came back from STS-51I and landed at Edwards, I spoke to Joe not too long after that because Chuck Yeager had come to the landing to see him and to congratulate him on his mission. And after Joe got out of the space shuttle, he went in and was taking a shower to get cleaned up before coming out to see the press. And Chuck Yeager walked into the shower, just walked in and hugged him in the shower. Hey, welcome back. To say the least, Joe said he was a bit shocked by it, but as I said, they were good friends. But as I say later on, I approached him to do the forward. And one of the things that had come out in the research for my book was that after Scott Crossfield died in 2006, Chuck Yeager was one of the first people that was being contacted by the press to comment about Scott Crossfield's death. And the things that Chuck Yeager said were absolutely despicable. I'm sorry, there's no other word to use for it. And when I talked to people like Scotty's daughter, Sally, about it, she came up with a really good term for Chuck Yeager, that she never talked about him as Chuck Yeager. He was simply, I hope this is okay to say on your podcast, Yeager Kid. And that was her term for him. And so when I contacted Joe, knowing that he was extremely good friends with Chuck, I was really a little worried about that. At first, he just wanted to read his own chapter to get comments on that. But I told him, no, I think you need to read the entire manuscript before you agree to do this, because I wanted to make sure he knew that there were some derogatory things in my book about Chuck Yeager. And it was interesting because he read his own chapter first, and he wrote his first version of the foreword just after doing that. And he wrote some nice things about Chuck Yeager in there. And that's when I reminded him, no, you really need to read the whole thing. And that's where he came back and he said, thank you very much for informing me of that, because yes, I do need to change my foreword. But even then, he still went ahead and did it. I was afraid with the derogatory comments that he might say, no, we probably shouldn't do this. But he didn't care. He said, no, this is worth doing. And I really, really thank him for that. And it went on from there. And his foreword really helped make the book what it is.
Fantastic. Obviously, your book and your interviews with him were about the X-15. But I wonder if you have any comments about the fact that he was supposed to land on the moon but didn't. Obviously, he's very famously got bumped off the Apollo 17 crew for Harrison Smith, which was a great decision in terms of having a scientist on the moon. But obviously, personally for Joe, I'm sure that wasn't ideal. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Oh, I definitely had to ask Joe about that in our first interview, and we talked about it somewhere later as well. And I mean, I can't imagine being in a position of being assigned as a lunar module pilot to land on the moon and then having that yanked away from you. His comment on it, though, was always very pragmatic. He said, I was very disappointed in not being able to go, but I also understood the rationale for it. It was terrible that we lost the 18, 19, and 20 Apollo missions, and we needed to get somebody up there, a geologist on the moon. So I understood that, but it doesn't change the fact that, I would have liked to have gone there.
Yeah.
But it also shows the personality and the character of someone like Joe Engle, in the fact that how many people would have just said, okay, that's it. I'm out of here. I'm done. I'm going to go do something else. And Joe did just the opposite. He stuck with that program for many years afterwards and was one of the lead pilots on the Space Shuttle program, doing the approach and landing tests and then going on to fly 2 orbital missions as commander on STS-2 and STS-51I. And I mean, I cannot think of a better thing to put on your resume to say, hey, they kicked me off the moon landing, but I still stuck around and I flew the shuttle. And that just says more about Joe than anything I can say.
Engle's X-15 experience undoubtedly influenced the decision to have him fly 2 of the 5 Enterprise atmospheric tests and STS-2's partially manual re-entry. Why were these tests so crucial for the shuttle program, and why was his input so essential?
Well, the fact that he had flown the X-15 certainly made him one of the absolute best candidates to fly the approach and landing tests, and then also, of course, to be the only pilot in the shuttle program to ever fly manually from deorbit burn all the way to touchdown at Edwards.
Mental. Yeah, crazy.
Nobody else was ever given that opportunity, and it was Engle and the X-15 that made that happen. So he proved that it could work, which was great. But of course, nobody else needed to do it, which was a good thing. You know, they never lost the computers, so nobody else had to fly it manually. But to be able to have the skill to fly all the way from orbit down to the ground is just an amazing feat. And that came about because of the X-15. The X-15 did not have any kind of autopilot on there. And so they had to fly back. You know, he's flying back from his highest mission was 288,000 feet. So he knew what it was like. As he told me when he was flying that manual reentry, it was a piece of cake for him because he'd already been there. And it made so much difference in that respect. So NASA was good to choose someone like him to be on the shuttle program. And they were very smart to choose him to do that absolutely critical test of doing that manual reentry. There's no one else that could have done that but Joe.
I wonder if he had any thoughts about doing a barrel roll whilst doing that manual.
That's you know, I could see Joe saying, "Sure, why not? That's that first orbital reentry, why not?" But I can also see him saying, "You know, Paul Bickle would get really pissed off at me if I did that, so I guess I better keep it straight."
Amazing. So during his last decade, Engle began speaking more publicly about his career at events. What's your personal favorite Joe Engle story?
God, there's so many little snippets from his life and from our time together and stuff. The fact that he and I were able to do so many events together over the last several years was just a great thing. My personal favorite moment is one that he did for me. So it's sort of a selfish thing to talk about. But at Space Fest, I arranged to do an X-15 panel. I had done my X-15 talk several times at Space Fest over the years. And they invited me back, and I said, "Well, this year I want to do something different. I don't want to just do my X-15 talk again. Let's try to put together a panel." And of course, first on the list was, can we get Joe to come in and be on that panel? And then we also got several engineers for the panel as well, Vince Capasso and Wayne Ottinger, people like that. So we did that panel, and it was probably one of the most amazing 90 minutes or so of my life to be up there and be on that panel with Joe, talking about the X-15 with the engineers, all of us together, relating these stories. And at the end of the panel, there was this huge standing ovation. And I'm sitting there next to Joe, and I said, "Joe, this is for you. This is the first time he'd done a public appearance like this. It was the first time he ever went to Space Fest." And I said, "They are so glad to see you here today and so excited to hear your stories." And he reached over and he just tapped my knee and he said, "No, Michelle, this is for you."
Oh, wow.
And that's a moment in my life I will absolutely never forget. I mean, I know they were there for Joe, but for him to be that magnanimous and say that to me just says it all. It really does.
Yeah. I want to vouch that I was there, and I was there for that. And it was freaking amazing. It was awesome. Like, I still can't get over the fact that I even saw that, you know, because I'm like, Wow. Okay, I'll stop. I'm getting a little off topic here. So,
Well, that's okay. I'm glad you were able to see that. That was a wonderful day.
it was incredible. I'm one of the people who stood up. It was just, I couldn't believe I was seeing it because, oh God, you're going to hear that in a second. I couldn't believe I was seeing it because I was like, this is the panel of dreams, because I'd always wanted to see Joe Engle talk about anything, really. And it was just amazing. I mean, it was just overall amazing. So next question, what do you think Joe Engle's legacy will be?
Oh, his legacy is that he really is the perfect example of what a pilot should be, how they should comport themselves, how professional they can be in what they do. And pilots overall have this reputation for being very arrogant in their, it's like, I'm better than everybody else because I'm out there flying Mach 12 or whatever it is. And Joe was never, ever like that. Joe was, as I said before, a gentleman. He was always very, I can't think of the right word to say it. But he was humble about everything. He really was. And I think that would be a great lesson for other pilots to take with them as well, is you're doing a great job. You're excelling in a field that is very much an elite profession, but you can still be human and you can still relate to other people without having to be arrogant about it. Because that's one thing that Joe absolutely never was. He was never arrogant about anything. And I met a lot of pilots and they can be just arrogant as hell. And he is not in that category in the slightest.
Yeah, he's certainly, I mean, I never met him, but everyone whose tributes I've read that have met him all seem to be saying that. They all seem to be saying about what a gentleman he was, how he had time for everyone, big smile on his face always, and very humble. And so I think you've captured that brilliantly today. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about Joe Engle. I personally think that your book about the X-15 is the definitive book about the X-15. I absolutely love it.
Thank you.
It's one of my favorite spaceflight books, and I just think it's such a wonderful program. So thank you for coming on and sharing us. We'd love to get you back to talk just about the X-15. If you would like to come back sometime, we'll try and get a date in the diary for that, because it's a subject that we've been meaning to have discussed on this podcast. We talk about the X-15 quite a lot. I think it's both mine and Emily's one of our favorite programs, and we've yet to devote a podcast to it. So we hope that you would do that with us one day.
Oh, I would absolutely love to talk about the X-15. I'm out there talking about the X-15 all the time, and I've done over 140 talks on the X-15 all around the country and around the world. I've done my talks on 5 continents now, even including Antarctica, which is pretty cool. But my ultimate goal is I want to do at least 199 talks so I can match the record of the number of X-15 flights. So I still got over 50 to go, but we're working on it. And in fact, I'm just developing a brand new program on the X-15 where I'm doing sort of a personal program on the X-15. It's called My Adventures with the X-15.
Amazing.
And it talks about that whole idea of why I did the book, how I did the book, the people I met along the way. And I'm really excited. I'm going to be doing it for the first time just in a few weeks. And I'm looking forward to getting it finished off and see what kind of reception I get. But yeah, I'd absolutely love to come back. And I appreciate you so much to have me on here to talk about Joe. He is somebody that I wish more people knew about and just can't say enough good things about him. I mean, really, there is not one bad thing I could think about with him in all of my interactions with him. Absolutely positive, 100%. And my heart goes out to Jeannie, which she's going through right now. And I wish her well. And
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to talking to her more in the future as well.
Thank you very much for joining us. I know this is a difficult time, and these podcasts are always tough to do in these situations, but you've done a great job, and thank you very much for sharing your stories with us.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on, and thank you for helping get the word out about Joe.
Are you over the moon about this podcast? It's not just a phase. You're listening to Space and Things.
So, Emily, I know that he was a huge hero of yours, and I know that many of our listeners have already posted incredible stories about when they met Joe Engle and how amazing he was and how humble he was. There's a historical significance to his passing, as he is the last person to die who piloted the X-15. And we're not going to talk too much about the X-15 now, because we are going to talk about it in an upcoming episode, and we're really going to delve deeper into that. But the X-15 is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful machine and an incredible program. There was three of the planes, 199 flights, I think, in total. Unfortunately, there was one fatality. And we will talk about that, as I said, in a few weeks when we discuss this. But the remaining two planes, if you're interested in this, the remaining two planes, one of them is at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. It's being refurbished at the moment, but if you're lucky, you might see it in the hangar. And the other one is at the Air Force Museum in Dayton. And the other thing, if you're interested in Joe Engle, and Emily briefly mentioned this before the interview as well, is it's very much worth going to Oshkosh, to the Experimental Aviation Museum there. We've spoken to Chris Henry before when we were talking about Frank Borman. We spoke to him, and weirdly, I sent him a message just last week, and we've got an episode coming up with him again about Spaceship One. But that museum has got a whole section devoted to Joe and Jeannie Engle and their collection of things which he has donated to them. And it is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful collection, and well worth going to see. So if you're interested in Joe Engle, make sure you try and get up there. They have an amazing air show, which I believe is happening around now. So if you can try and tie it in with visiting the air show, I'm sure you won't be disappointed in that either. But it's just a great place to go anyway. They've got a great selection of planes. But Emily, tell us more about why Joe is one of your ultimate heroes.
God, this is kind of emotional. STS-2 was the first launch I saw when I was a very little kid. We had just moved to Florida. We'd lived in Florida, but we just moved to Oldsmar, Florida. At the time, Oldsmar was very rural. It was by Tampa. It's still by Tampa, obviously, but very rural area. Nobody lived there at the time. So anyway, I remember shortly after we moved there, going outside, and my mom was like, "Oh my God, the space shuttle's going up." And I kind of knew what the space shuttle was. I was a toddler. I'd seen pictures of it and stuff, but I was like, space shuttle, So we go outside, look to the east, and it was kind of a nice November morning. And we look over, and sure enough, there's the space shuttle. And I mean, I still remember seeing even from where I was, we were about 120, 130 miles out. You could still see it pretty well. You could see and then, you saw the little two matchsticks, the boosters drop off. And then you saw the engines, there was like a blue flame, and you just saw it go to orbit. I was like, and even though I was very little, I knew it was a spaceship. I knew it was going to space. I mean, and after that point, I was obsessed with space. And Joe Engle and Richard Truly are to thank for that, because they were aboard that. And I didn't know it until years later, because I was like, man, what was the launch in late night? It was like 1981. We had just moved. I was like, that was the STS-2. It was Columbia. It wasn't the first one. So I've talked to I've talked to a lot of other people. And that was one of the pivotal moments that also got them into spaceflight, during the first shuttle launches. So really, if it hadn't been for STS-2 happening the day it did, because it was supposed to go a few days earlier, apparently, and it got scrubbed. And it actually was supposed to go a few months earlier, but I think there was some kind of spill, like a leak or something, so they had to send it back to the VAB or something like that. But if it hadn't gone on that particular day, at that moment, Space Hipsters would have never happened. None of this would have ever happened. I wouldn't be sitting here right now talking about this with you. So really, that STS-2 is the thing that started everything. I can't thank General Engle and Admiral Truly enough for that. They got me hooked. And like I said, everything that's happened since then is really because of them. I owe it 100% to them. I never met Truly. I've talked to some of his family, and his family is wonderful, but I never met him in real life. I met Engle, I met General Engle, and I met Jeannie, and they're both wonderful. I think somebody else said it better than I could this week. Another friend of mine said, they always say never meet your heroes, right? Well, they never met General Engle. They never met him. He was honestly a fantastic person, very funny, very personable. I think he was a little surprised that so many people were like obsessed with him. I think because I remember approaching him and he was really friendly, but I remember feeling like he was like, why do you care about what I did? Dude, do you know what you did? I don't think he knew he was Joe Engle, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think he was aware of who he was almost, because I'm like, dude, you're one of the biggest. I didn't say this to him, but you know how I am when I meet people. I become a complete idiot. When I talked to him, I was like, oh my God, you're the first space launch I ever saw as a kid. You've been one of my heroes ever since. I just want to say hi to you. I think he was kind of like, almost like amused. Like, why do you want to talk to me? I mean, seriously, this very normal, down-to-earth guy, very easy to talk to. So it's wonderful to meet your hero and know that he's a cool person and he's really nice.
Well, we've certainly heard that today, both from you and from Michelle, and we will talk to Michelle again soon, so we won't talk too much about her here, but that X-15 book really is amazing. If you haven't read it, make sure you read it, and if you'd like to know more, I will be putting more information along with more extensive Joe Engle obituaries in the show notes, which you can find by clicking on the link in the description of this podcast on your podcast provider, or by heading to spaceandthingspodcast.com.
Our sincerest thanks to our many supporting members across the solar system. To join us, go to patreon.com/Space and Things.
So, Emily, I imagine it's probably going to be the same thing that's caught my eye this week. But
yes.
What has caught your eye in spaceflight this week?
Well, first of all, according to the journal Nature, researchers have discovered that there is data that suggests there is an empty lava great, Emily, empty lava tube in the Sea of Tranquility, whereas, as we know, ironically, on this day that we're recording, it is July 16th. This is where Apollo 11 landed almost 55 years to the day, but researchers have discovered what they think is a empty lava tube in the Sea of Tranquility. And this is a big deal because according to a study by the international team of researchers led by Italy's University of Trento, this would be a promising site for a lunar base as it offers shelter from the harsh surface environment and could support long-term human exploration on the moon. And this was discovered by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. Another story this week, and Dave will probably notice this one too, was a Falcon 9 rocket launched from Vandenberg, had 20 Starlink satellites aboard it, suffered a very rare in-flight anomaly in its upper stage. It looked like there was some kind of leak in the upper stage. There was a lot of ice on the engine, around the engine bell area if you saw the live feed. They and the FAA are going to run an investigation about it, but this has implications in that it's going to ground the Falcon 9 for a while.
That's huge.
Yeah, it is huge because Polaris Dawn is supposed to go in a few weeks.
Well, just think about how many launches there are. I mean, this thing goes up 2 or 3 times a week now.
We see one once a week here, it seems.
Exactly. So this is a pretty big story. So yeah, it looks like it was liquid oxygen, according to the reports that was leaking from that second stage. The first stage still was fine and landed on the barge as it normally does. So it was just that second stage. They had to shut down the engine early. And obviously it didn't quite reach the orbit it was supposed to be. Yeah, this does have implications, not just on human spaceflight, but on so much other spaceflight, because Falcon 9 is the ride into space. So that really is a big story.
Yeah.
We will obviously see how that develops over the next few weeks. No idea how long it will take for the FAA to grant them a new license. I imagine they'll be on that quite quick because there's going to be a lot of money lost if this thing isn't going up. And a lot of spaceflight delayed. So hopefully SpaceX know what the problem was and they get it sorted. But we should state that the success of the Falcon 9 is still huge. And as a percentage of successful flights to ones that haven't been successful, it's so high. It's been such an incredible, safe vehicle for flying and getting things into orbit. So yes, this is an anomaly. We're lucky that there was no humans on board. I don't think it would have been catastrophic for humans if they had been on board.
They may have been able to make the short. I'm guessing this is a guess. I could be wrong, and if I am wrong, somebody please reach out and correct me. But I'm thinking if there had been people on board, maybe they would have been able to make up the shortfall.
Quite possibly.
Maybe.
Yeah, I know they tried that with the Starlink satellites, but it was just a bit too far for them with the small engines that they have. So they weren't able to get the Starlink satellites that were on board the rocket into their correct orbit. But yes, it certainly needs to be looked at, doesn't it? We don't want that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm going to jump the gun here, Emily, but there was another launch in China that suffered a failure. The Chinese company iSpace has suffered its fourth launch in 7 tries. So I know we love to celebrate our successes in spaceflight, but it's also good to remember that space is hard and it is difficult, and we shouldn't take these for granted. We shouldn't take any space vehicle, no matter how successful it is, for granted that it's going to work all the time, and we shouldn't get complacent about these things.
I hope I'm not interrupting you, but I think Ariane 6 had a upper stage failure as well. Thankfully, I don't think it was carrying anything vital, but I think it was trying to relight and it didn't.
Oh, I didn't see that. Wow.
I think that did happen. And I want to point out that otherwise it worked fine. It's a brand new rocket.
Yeah, first launch.
So,
Exactly.
So I'm honestly shocked when a first launch goes off and it has no problems.
Yeah, and there's got a big few weeks for SpaceX as well. It looks like we're going to have another Starship launch soon as well, which will be fun, and hopefully they'll get even further this time than they did last time, which was pretty impressive last time. So yes lots going on as always in the world of spaceflight, and we'll put some links to articles about those stories in the show notes.
Streaming from Earth's northern hemisphere to the solar system and beyond, you're listening to the Space and Things podcast.
That's it for this week. We hope you learned something today about Joe Engle, which you may not have previously known. Thank you for all your support, as always, and a big shout out once again to our Patreon subscribers, of course. We'd love to have some more people join. And you can sign up or just find out more by heading over to patreon.com/Space and Things.
Again, this is off script. I want to apologize for all the explosions in the background. Where I'm at, I'm not in a war zone, I swear. I'm just in Florida. Same thing, really. Same difference, right? Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Pretty much. I'm going to get canceled off the face of the planet, but whatever. Time of career death, 7/16/20. Okay. Anyway, thank you for listening, and a big shout out to all of you who continue to share this podcast with your spaceflight loving friends and family. And please don't forget that in space, no one can hear you mean.
This has been the Space and Things podcast with Emily Carney and Dave Giles.